afternoon, everyone. My name is Monica Sack, and as mentioned, I'm the Programming and Advancement Manager here at South by Southwest. We are extremely excited about this next session, which ties in with our significantly increased focus on health here at South by Southwest. Earlier today, we started out our programming with the Connect to End Cancer series over in our health track. These sessions highlighted the different organizations helping to support the Biden Foundation Cancer Initiative and shared important information regarding their fight to make cancer a thing of the past. There will be one final session at 5 o'clock following this session. Here to give you a better overview of the Biden Foundation Cancer Initiative and this next session in general is Dr. Jill Biden. And now, please join me in welcoming Dr. Jill Biden and Vice President Joe Biden to the stage. Hi. Thank you. Well, hello everyone. Thank you for that enthusiastic welcome. So it's an honor for me and for Joe to be here at South by Southwest to discuss our mission to end cancer as we know it. Like us, many of you understand what this fight is all about. Many of you know someone, a friend, a colleague, a family member who has been afflicted or lost because of this disease. For us, it was the death of our beloved son, Beau. We are here to tell you that all of us have something to contribute. You don't have to be a doctor or a nurse or a researcher to feel that you can make a difference. In fact, we're not going to beat cancer unless we all do our part. That's what it's going to take. Only together can we seize the moment to defeat cancer. This means that we need everyone, survivors, family members, healthcare practitioners, philanthropists, innovators, to have a seat at the table. This means all of you. We're not going to stop until we can get this done. We are bringing together the best and the brightest with one goal in mind: to accelerate the rate of progress in preventing, diagnosing, and treating cancer. It's all about hope, and it's all about action, including how we will remain in this fight, which Joe will talk about. Action that puts the patient at the center of care. Action that allows patients to find clinical trials faster and easier. Action that focuses on cancer prevention and early detection. Action that builds public-private relationships, partnerships to improve cancer research efforts. Action that encourages innovators like many of you to design new solutions to the challenges patients face. So it is now my pleasure to introduce my man of action, a man who always strives to make the seemingly impossible possible. My husband, the 47th Vice President of the United States, Joe Biden.
Hey, folks. Thank you. Hey, Jill. My name's Joe Biden. I am Jill Biden's husband. And I was just checking to make sure if I got her directions correct. Well, I want to thank you all for being here. Obviously, Pharrell's not playing at the same time. There must be something going on here. I thank you very much. I quite frankly didn't expect this many people. But in all seriousness, your presence speaks volumes, volumes. It tells me that so many of you have either experienced or had a family member or a friend who had a run-in with cancer, or that you feel the obligation to be engaged. This is a diverse audience. Some of the people here are genuine experts on all aspects of cancer. Others of you, as I said, have been touched by cancer. Jill and I decided that we were going to devote at least a portion of the rest of our lives in this fight against cancer. There are 16 million people who die from cancer every year. And if we don't do anything about it, the status quo ante remains. The experts predict that by the year 2020, 26 million will die. Like many of you, the passion Jill and I bring to this effort is driven by a desire to spare other families what our family and so many other families have gone through. As a matter of fact, the so-called cancer moonshot, which was announced over a year ago, grew out of an offhand comment that I made. We had lost our son on Memorial Day, and I had been putting off a decision as to whether or not to seek the Democratic nomination for president. And what I realized over that summer and into the fall, that neither Jill nor I, nor my beloved son Hunter or my daughter Ashley, really, at least speaking for myself, had the stomach to do it. No one should ever run for president of the United States unless they are prepared to give every ounce of their energy to that undertaking. And so, after a long talk with the president, the decision I made was to announce I wasn't running, and the president said, let's do it in the Rose Garden. And he walked out with me, and I made an offhand comment. It wasn't a prepared script. I knew the press would ask me, do I have any regrets? And I said ahead of time, I had one regret in making the decision not to run. And that was, I would have loved to have been the president who presided over the end of cancer as we know it. Shortly after that comment, the president approached me and said, we ought to be doing more. And I went through what I had learned. And to my surprise, at the State of the Union, he announced to the world that I was going to be, quote, mission control in the cancer moonshot. But the great thing about working with Barack, with the President Obama, who for a long time has been a close personal friend, a man I admire a great deal, as I do Michelle, and Jill shares our view, was that when he gave me an assignment, he gave me all the authority of a president to be able to follow through with that assignment. I could hire, fire, I could set priorities. I didn't have to check. And so I set off on what turned out to be a year effort at home and around the world to see if there was a consensus among the leaders in this fight in every discipline as to the things we had to do to make more progress. I learned, as a consequence of going to virtually every major cancer center here and most abroad as well, meeting with Nobel laureates and the finest minds and most dedicated people I've worked with in my whole life, that there was a consensus on a number of things. I learned that there was a considerable need for greater collaboration among the disciplines. When you have someone you love who gets essentially a diagnosis that, statistically at least, is a death sentence, in this particular cancer our son had, you go out and you try to learn everything you possibly can about it. And one of the things I learned was that only 5 years before his diagnosis, after coming back from Kosovo and then from Iraq as a decorated hero, a major in the United States Army, I learned that just 5 years earlier, there wasn't much collaboration at all, even among disciplines. But about 5 years earlier, we reached an inflection point in the fight against cancer. Up to that time, immunotherapy was viewed as sort of a voodoo science, not a joke. The immunotherapist in the audience can tell you. It had a brief shining moment at the turn of the 20th century, and then it was disbanded. Virologists weren't accustomed to working with any of the disciplines. But all of a sudden, there was a new hope. These disciplines coming together. I learned that we had to approach cancer at this moment with the urgency of now. I learned that there was a need in the fight for all of you going through this dreaded disease for hope. From this cancer moonshot, when it was born, we decided to take a new approach to conquering cancer. When we announced the moonshot, I knew that there would be skeptics out there, understandably, saying, well, here we go again. Didn't we do this before? Didn't President Nixon do this? Which he did, in all sincerity and dedication. In 1971, he declared a war on cancer. So what was going to make this different? But there were big differences. Back then in 1971, President Nixon had no army to fight the war. He had no resources. He had no clear strategy to win. But after 45 years of progress, after decades of funding research, training scientists and physicians, treating millions of patients, we now had an army. We now had powerful new technologies and tools like immunotherapy that makes cancer cells visible to the immune system so our natural defenses can destroy the cancer. Surgeons using cutting-edge robotics to allow more precise imaging and to be able to find the cancer in precise surgery to move it with the least amount of damage to the surrounding tissue. Liquid biopsies that hold the promise of finding early-stage cancers in the blood, some that take a decade to develop, detecting them, and moving before the cancer controls. These advances provide hope that more precise medicines and diagnostics might greatly improve our ability to detect and deter cancer. And as I said, on so many levels, I've come to realize that we have reached a new inflection point. I remember when in my physics class in high school, our professor saying, defining an inflection point, he said, it's the point at which you're driving down the highway at 60 miles an hour, both hands on the wheel, you turn abruptly 6 or 8 degrees, and you can never get back on the path you were on before. Well, science, technology has reached that point, and we have moved. but with enormous promise, and our hands are on the wheel. When the Cancer Research and Oncology Care System was set up, though, in 1971, we thought there was only one cancer cell that resided in different parts of the body. We've now learned there are over 200 distinct cancers, different in their molecular makeup, different in their genomic makeup. For decades, we thought we could tackle cancer one discipline at a time. We learned that's not how cancer operates. Cancer uses every tool at its disposal. It hides from the immune system. It builds its own blood supply system. It uses viruses to spread. It literally engineers friendly cellular environments within your body to support its survival and its growth. And it knows how to spread through the body using pathways and mutations we don't even understand today. Cancer never gives up. It never surrenders. And that's why we must use every discipline cancer does. And we're starting to do that. As I said, 5 years ago, oncologists were routinely working closely with immunologists, virologists, geneticists, chemical and biological engineers. Now they are. Immunologists are finding the keys to making cancer cells visible so you could target them. Virologists are working on vaccines to prevent and treat cancer in the first place. Geneticists are categorizing and cataloging mutations that drive the very cancer that causes the damage. Chemical and biological engineers are helping design cellular, environmentally hostile environments for the cancer in the body. And for the first time, they're all working together. And there's recognition that by aggregating and sharing millions of patients' data, like the genomics, family history, lifestyles, treatment, outcomes, by using the supercomputer power we have, we can find patterns. We can now do, as many of you techies in the audience know, 1 billion calculations per second, which will allow us to understand why one therapy or treatment works in one person and not in another. I've also learned from the best minds in the world that the strategy we've been following up to now has been the equivalent of fighting the last war. The model of scientific breakthroughs for most of our history in medicine was individual achievement, like Jonas Salk creating the polio vaccine. There was little, if any, sharing among hospitals or researchers, and little ability to share whatever data they had. And our funding processes and research systems primarily still follow that old model. But we have a whole new array of weapons. We have an army. We're still following the old model. So when the president asked me to set up this moonshot, I structured a different goal, designed around two goals: injecting an overwhelming sense of urgency, as I said, and changing the culture as to how we approach this fight. And here's how we did that. The Cancer Moonshot had 4 primary parts to it. The first, when we set it up, we set up what the White House Cancer Moonshot Task Force. That's a fancy way of saying we took every federal agency that exists that has had anything to do with fighting cancer, and some that are heretofore were not included, and brought them all together with a simple proposition. One of the leaders said, it's going to take me it was in March, it's going to take me till January until we find someone to head such and such a department. I said, looked at my watch, I said, what is it? It's 5 after 5, March the 7th. I said, if you don't have someone by March 15th, you're fired. Well, son of a gun. Guess what? We had someone by March the 15th. Not a joke. Not a joke. Because I promised the private sector and all the great hospitals like MD Anderson, who took care of my son, one of the great hospitals in the world, who's sponsoring this, among others, I promised them I'd do everything I could to knock down every silo that existed at the federal level, impeding progress. We break down the barriers, enhance efficiency of coordination of what we already were doing. The task force was made up of the heads of all government agencies traditionally involved to be part of this coordinated government effort. And under my leadership, we engaged the government agencies that were involved in the fight historically, the ones that should have been, and ones that should have been involved that never were involved. From the agencies you'd expect, like the National Institute of Health, the National Cancer Society, the NCI, the National Cancer Institute, the Department of Veterans Affairs. But to add to that, I added NASA, the space agency, and the Department of Energy, and the Patent Office. People, what are you doing that for? We made a great deal of progress. For example, a major tool in the fight against cancer, as you all know, is radiation. But you also know there are some very serious negative side effects to radiation. And you know that, honey, don't you? So did my son. But you're doing well, and you're going to be okay. And what happens is, it kills the bad guys, but guess what? It kills a lot of good cells, too. Even when it's really precise. Sometimes it goes through the cancer. So it kills it, but kills what's behind it. So I said, you know, I don't know any outfit that knows more about radiation than the National Aeronautics and Space Administration. NASA knows a lot about protecting astronauts in space. So we brought them together with the National Cancer Institute. Some people looked at me like we were crazy. So we could study the biological effects of particle beam radiotherapy, a novel technology that may, God willing, deliver more targeted doses of radiation to tumor cells with less collateral damage. This program is underway. Hope, hope. The task force also recommended that we take the largest repository of health records in the United States, the Department of Veterans Affairs, the largest hospital in the world, and ask it to cooperate with the Department of Energy to determine whether the troves of VA cancer data could be all assembled in one spot and assessed by the Department of Energy's supercomputing capability. Now, again, if you technology experts out there, you probably say, why the hell weren't they doing that all along? But they weren't. In the hopes that we can find new patterns that will allow researchers to make progress in diagnosis and treatment of patients with the disease. VA went so far, which is highly unlikely, to transfer $4 million. Doesn't sound like a lot of money, but they guard their money closely. $4 million to the Department of Energy so they could set up a dedicated line to do this. They also suggested that we host for the first time ever, which I did, the Cancer Moonshot Summit in Washington. Last June, 400 people from every discipline imaginable in the fight against cancer were assembled in D.C. at Howard University. But simultaneously, 7,000 people gathered in nearly 3,000 locales for their own summits held in every state, Guam, and Puerto Rico. As we had hoped, the summit launched a torrent of new collaborations and innovative initiatives across all sectors of the fight against cancer. For example, out of that summit, we launched a thing called the National Cancer Institute Genomic Data Commons at the University of Chicago, fancy long term. The Genomic Data Commons had cancer sequencing data and related patients' information within the National Cancer Institute of roughly 14,000 people in this thing called the Cancer Genome Atlas at the Institute, but wasn't available to anybody. So I said, why don't we put it in one place? allow anybody to be able to access it for any reason. That database has now grown with cancer sequencing data and related patient information by an additional 16,000 people since June. Now there's 30,000 individuals who have all their data in that one place to be able to be examined by anyone who wants to access it. Never been available before. And because of the year I spent going abroad, I was able to sign with 8 different countries, 10 international memorandum of understanding from Austria to Canada, South Korea to China, and 6 others, four others, with the expectation that they will share all the data they have with us and we with them. So the hope is there'll be tens of thousands of more patients, increasing that commons, and hopefully exponentially we'll have more data to be able to be examined to unlock some of the secrets this dreaded disease hides. And this matters, as I said before. There's recognition that by aggregating and sharing millions of patients' data, by using supercomputing power of billion calculations per second, we can understand why one therapy treatment works for one person and not another, and the patterns of how these cancers develop. Out of this recommendation from the task force, I got an unexpected call from Amazon. Maybe representatives from Amazon are here. I'm here to say thank you. They said, look, you're going to need an awful lot of space in the cloud to accommodate all this data. We will make it available to you for free. It's a big deal. Before this, you might say, what does Amazon have to do with curing cancer? There's hope. And by the way, let me define hope for you. Just since we started this aggregation of information at the University of Chicago, this data commons, 80 million times, hear me now, 80 million times that data has been accessed. 80 million times. From researchers all over the world. Again, increasing exponentially the prospect that someone, some few, some many, may find answers. Another thing we've done to increase our odds is we put in place last year a very practical tool, the ability to assess where every cancer trial in the United States is taking place and what the trial criteria are. Every cancer that is diagnosed, and we've got really competent folks all over the country. Competent oncologists in Bemidji, Minnesota, Smyrna, Delaware, not all the great centers of the world. Of everyone diagnosed, only 4%, 4 out of 100, ever are able to become part of a clinical trial, which is how research advances and may be the only hope for a particular patient when all other options have failed. But there was no way to really locate. That great doctor in Bemidji or some small town is not located near a great cancer center. Can't even find out. How can I get my patient into a particular trial? So I went to what we call the White House Presidential Innovation Fellows. Maybe some are here. President Obama had a great idea when we first got there. He said, why don't we tap into the incredible brain power and ingenuity of the folks in Silicon Valley and other places and get them to give to us on a yearly basis some of the finest minds in the country to come and work on modernizing how we deal with data in the federal government. So I went to a woman named Megan who heads it up. I said, Megan, you know, there's no place you can go to find out where the clinical trials are. Can you help me? Within a matter of a month, these brilliant young, their average age are probably in their early 40s, came back with a website, trials.cancer.gov. You can type in real words like breast cancer, leukemia, zip code, age. I'm always telling my staff, speak English to me, not as opposed to Spanish, as opposed to complicated. And so guess what? Now you can find every clinical trial that's near you or your loved one, and your doc can find that out. But here's the bonus. The drug companies, which deserve a rap sometimes and take too many raps sometimes, the reason they don't do more trials, they can't find people eligible for the trials. That's an incredible bonus now. They can identify anybody clicking their name in, what their cancer is, specifically what type of cancer, and be able to draw on them to do more studies. So out of the Cancer Moonshot Task Force, we initiated a thing called the Blood Profiling Atlas Pilot, the so-called Blood Pack, which holds a great, great deal of promise for progress. Because, you know, if you could detect the biological fragments that are shed by cancer cells into your bloodstream very early on, catch that cancer very early on, identify what is causing that, track treatments without painful, invasive tissue biopsies to find that cancer. You could do a lot. Let me give you one example. Colon cancer takes a long time to develop. You can find traces in the blood, these blood biopsies of that particular cancer. If you found it when you were 18, 20 years old, you wouldn't wait till you were 45 to do a colonoscopy. You'd start doing it when you were 20. Many of you had colonoscopies and find polyps that are precancerous. They're removed, and they don't develop into cancer that can kill you. Well, blood biopsies hold an enormous amount of promise. Great institutions like the Hutch and Anderson and Sloan Kettering and all these great hospitals, they're focusing on it, spending hundreds of millions of dollars. And as a consequence, government, academia, the pharmaceutical and diagnostic companies launched a partnership to create an open database for liquid biopsies, blood draws that is, to accelerate the development of safe and effective blood biopsies, profiling, diagnostics, technologies to benefit patients. Up to now, none of that data was shared. There's one place you can go. You can stop cancer before a patient even has the symptoms. There's hope. I could go on and on of the task force they made 80 similar recommendations. But let me give you one more that really excited me. It's what we call the NCI National Cancer Institute Formulary. And here's how it works. Drug companies have, I think the number is roughly about 275 drugs they have in early stages of testing to see whether they would work. Now, when we made the progress we made worldwide against AIDS, we found out it was use of multiple drugs. No one drug did it. Well, we're finding out now, of late, researchers, that sometimes drugs in combination, drug company A, drug company B, and drug company C, all are working on a particular cancer with a particular therapy. And people think, well, maybe if you put all three together, we may have more progress. But to get some coordination to be able to allow you to use all three of their drugs can take you between a year and 3 or 4 years, or maybe never at all. So, got a really smart guy running this operation for me named Greg Simon. Greg came along with an idea. Why don't we have the National Cancer Institute work out ahead of time? Work out ahead of time. The intellectual property, who owns what, who gets what credit for what happens. For example, if you go into an Austin place that has a jukebox, you want to play anything other than a two-step, which you might, all kidding aside, what do? You don't have to have an individual licensing agreement with Beyonce or with whomever. It's already done. She already knows what her cut's going to be. We've done the same thing with drug companies. And guess what? It's a boon for them. They like it because they otherwise are spending tens of millions of dollars going down what may be a rabbit hole. So now they put the drugs on the table. Any young or old researcher can come along and say, I want to try combinations. Their liability is limited, et cetera. It's worked out. Initially, there were only several. Now there's over a dozen drug companies participating. And I predict it will grow. And I urge as many of you as possible to join it, participate, share. It has a possibility of making an enormous difference. As I said, there are dozens of examples like this. The third structural piece of the moonshot was to set up what we call a blue ribbon panel. And so I went to the leading people in government and out of government and said, who are the best minds in the world? And I mean that literally, not figuratively, including, as I said, a number of Nobel laureates. I contacted them and asked them, would they be on this blue ribbon panel? They came from the private sector, great research hospitals, research organizations, universities, philanthropies, et cetera. And they agreed to serve. One, who is doing enormous work, the former head of the Department of Neurosurgery at University of Virginia, is working with ultrasound as a way to maybe get to cancers and do less damage. He was put on a committee, came back, and he said, you know, he had done a couple craniotomies on me because I had 2 aneurysms. Explains a lot about me. But he said, I thought this would just be the same old thing. But everybody's excited and cooperating. And what I asked them to do was a simple thing. Examine all that's on the table out there and been recommended. Take your time and then tell us, recommend to us what areas hold the greatest promise in the shortest amount of time and warrant the most urgent investment. My nephew, Cuff Owens, is here. His grandfather used to have an expression. He'd say, if everything's equally important to you, nothing is important to you. If everything is equally important to you, nothing is important to you. So we got these best minds in the world to say, this is what we recommend you focus on first. Doesn't dictate that has to happen, but it helps me and others who are raising monies to be able to focus on these various therapies, gives us a little bit of a roadmap. The Blue Ribbon Panel delivered a report with transformative recommendations to change research blueprint at the National Institute of Health, of Cancer. And by the way, private philanthropy is really important. But guys, the bulk of the money, billions and billions, comes from taxpayers. Your government, that many of you don't like, is the vehicle for how this gets funded by and large. So, for example, here's a couple things they said. And by the way, I know for the experts in the audience, this is awfully boring because I'm telling you things you've already known and long forgotten. But I'm of the view, if we ask the taxpayers for billions of dollars, which we've recently done and have in the past, we've got to be able to translate it and say, we're not wasting your money. This is what we're doing with it. This is the promise it holds, or this is the result it delivered. So, one of the first things is launching a program to identify people who have something called the Lynch syndrome that causes stage 4 colorectal and endometrial cancers in people 20 to 30 years of age, awful young. But if we could detect early, we could stop it in its tracks. So that's why they suggest testing for it rather than waiting until someone's 40 as I said, to get a colonoscopy is a bad idea. If you have Lynch syndrome, instead you start when they detect it in your late teens and 20s. Hope. They also recommend that we focus on a thing called 3D Cancer Atlas, a great predictive tool of how certain cancers are going to metastasize. Today, oncologists rely on past experiences, consultation with multidisciplinary teams, published studies, and other sources to make diagnosis, progression, and treatment decisions and recommendations along the way. But providing a web-based catalog of the genetic lesions and cellular interactions in tumors, immune systems, cells around the tumor, one that maps the evolution of a tumor from development to metastasis, will enable researchers to develop predictive models of tumor progression and response to treatment that will ultimately help oncologists make informed treatment decisions for each patient. You all know people who've been treated. Sometimes the first treatment recommended is not the best one, or the second or third. If you knew ahead of time which had the highest probability, you increase exponentially your prospects. Focus on expanding proven cancer prevention was another recommendation. Early detection strategies. By some estimates, at least 50% of all cancers can be prevented. And that prevention falls into three major categories. One, healthy lifestyles, avoiding cancer risk behaviors like smoking and many other things you become aware of. Two, focusing on clean air and clean water, notwithstanding the fact someone in a new outfit don't think there's global warming or bad things happen. There's not a lot of good stuff out there in some places. I shouldn't have said it that way. But it frustrates me. It frustrates me. But, and third, making diagnostic tools available, including at-risk and underserved communities. We know that if you get a detection, you have a breast health exam, and you are tested. If you find the cancer early, your chances increase significantly to survive. If you're poor, you don't have insurance, and or you live in underserved neighborhoods, your likelihood of getting that test doesn't occur until the cancer is moved to a stage that will be much more expensive to treat, as well as less likely to have the outcome you want. But there is a fourth area, investing in new diagnostic tools that can detect cancers earlier and those that can identify hereditary markers, like the Lynch syndrome is one that I mentioned. And the last part of the moonshot, structurally, was I was to issue to the President an executive report, which I delivered to the President in October, on the progress we made the previous year. And my vision, with a lot of collaboration, of what the road ahead should look like. That executive summary lays out the changes we need to implement our research institutions and improve those institutions and universities to align our research system with the realities and opportunities of the 21st century. Once the report was released, we got about the business of deciding how to significantly increase funding for cancer. As some of you remember, when I'd say we were going to get funding, I was told, Biden doesn't know what he's talking about. He's been around a long time, but this is a different Congress. He'll never get the funding with only weeks left in the Congress. But the one thing I know, as well or better than anybody living, is the Congress. And guess what? Guess what? The only bipartisan thing left in America is the fight against cancer. So led by some really, really smart, dedicated Republicans, like a guy named Fred Upton in the House or a guy named Lamar Alexander in the Senate, by really smart, dedicated Democrats, like Patty Murray and others around the country. They got together. They came together and they wrote what was called the 21st Century Cures Act. And they're only going to ask a little money to begin with. And I suggested we ask for a lot of money. We asked for $6.3 billion in the waning hours of the Congress on biomedical and health-related research, including $1.8 billion for the National Cancer Institute to invest in additional research in parts of the moonshot. And guess what? The leadership of the Congress stood up and insisted on it. I got to preside in the Senate over the debate as president of the Senate. And to show you there's still a lot of really decent people left in the Congress in both parties. To my surprise, and I must tell you I had difficulty holding it together, before the final passage, a Republican, the majority leader, Mitch McConnell, a tough partisan, stood up and moved that the United States Senate rename the $1.8 billion in cancer research the Beau Biden Initiative. So, folks, I know as you've read about me many things, but you always heard the last 8 years and referred to me, I was listed as the White House optimist, like I'm the new guy in town. I am optimistic. I'm optimistic about the American people. Given half a chance, they've never, ever, 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 ever let the country down. And the core of the Republicans in the Congress and Democrats are good, decent, honorable people. Being almost artificially separated by a new kind of partisanship. I'm confident we can break through it. I'm confident it can be done. And it's my hope that this new administration, once it gets organized, and I'm not being facetious, will be able to focus on and be as committed and as enthusiastic as we were in the goal of ending cancer as we know it. And I pledge before all of you and all the world, I will do everything in my power to work with the new administration. But I also know those in the private sector, philanthropy, academic institutions, nonprofit organizations, they're insisting we continue to finish the work we started. So a group of them, including Eric Lander up at MIT, who ran the President's Science and Technology Board, several Nobel laureates, about 35 of the leading cancer specialists in the world, came to me in January and said, we'd like you to set up the Biden Cancer Initiative, and we'll work with you. To continue the work, its mission will be to inject a sense of urgency and change the culture. And so, later this month, I hope to announce, and with a board that is very, very impressive, what we're going to do to continue to make sure we don't lose the momentum that's been built. It's not merely a momentum built here in the United States, it's become a momentum we built around the world. I'll give you one practical example. The President had 50 heads of state in the East Room, the major room you see all the events take place, around a gigantic rectangular table that was organized by small tables, 50 heads of state. It was on nuclear proliferation and how to deal with it. The President sat in front of the fireplace, and I had my back to that grand hallway you see the President walk into when he's going to speak. And before he began, he looked at everyone assembled and said, ladies and gentlemen, I know, he was serious, I know you want to speak to the Vice President about cancer, but let's take care of the nuclear issue first. Not a joke. This is a dread worldwide, and I'm convinced we can make gigantic progress, but we need your help and your involvement. South by Southwest has brought together some of the most creative minds in the world whether it's in entertainment or music, science, technology. You all might think that patient medical data, research data, clinical trial data is really shared in this high-tech age of instant communication and connectivity, but it's not. You might think that when there's a successful outcome treating a deadly cancer in one medical setting, that all docs around the world know what that is and they can use it themselves for their patients quickly, but it isn't. You might think that when doctors and researchers take blood samples or tissue samples from patients, that is done by a standard taught in medical school that is constant throughout the country. It's not. You might think that when companies or researchers at universities have a trial that fails, they would let the research community immediately know it by posting the data to avoid other people going down the same rabbit hole. They don't. They don't. You might think that at a time when Facebook has an algorithm to tell if someone is exhibiting potentially suicidal tendencies, that our medical centers would be able to find and test people at risk for certain cancers. But they can't. Why? You might think that when people get a cancer diagnosis from their doctor, that there's someone in the hospital to help them navigate all the decisions they need to make, to help them deal with their fear and anxiety, but there usually is not. That's why we need your help. You're the future. Many of you are developing technologies and innovations for purposes large and small, fun and serious, entertaining and life-saving, that have nothing to do with cancer. But you can make a gigantic impact. We need your ingenuity. We can have a profound impact on cancer. We need you to help us reach people who need to change their behavior and avoid cancers. You're doing it for getting people how to figure out how to buy a product. Why does it not work? We need to reach people to make it clear to them why it's important to get tested, how to do it, and why it's painless. We need to help people find the right doctor and hospital for their particular situation, to find out their treatment options, to empower patients with easy ways to share their data, to contribute to research. And perhaps most importantly, we need to connect cancer patients and their families to others with the same cancers so they can learn from each other, share advice, encouragement, and hope. Toward the end, my bow was, we were told, and they did a wonderful job, a trial of one. He had a thing called anti-PD-1 injected in his veins, and then an adenovirus directed directly into his brain. And in the hope that it might have the ability to attract your T cells and have them eat up the bad guys, eat up that tumor. At first, it was, the folks were giddy about it. It was having such an impact. But he was now in a hospital up in Pennsylvania and then at Walter Reed as an Army veteran. And he had to have these, like many of you went through similar things, he had to have a CAT scan done at least once a day to determine the progress. You know what we found out? As Vice President of the United States, I had the entire United States Air Force available to me. And guess what? There was no way to share the result from that CAT scan at Walter Reed or at Jefferson Hospital with the folks at MD Anderson, because they had different electronic data methods of keeping data. So my son-in-law is one of the leading surgeons in Philadelphia, would go in with his cell phone and take a picture of a CAT scan and communicated by cell phone. MD Anderson. When Barack and I wrote the Recovery Act, which spent over $800 billion in 18 months preventing what's most 80% of the economists say from a Great Depression, with less than 0.1% waste or fraud, we thought we were being pretty smart. We were told by everybody, electronic record keeping can save tens of billions of dollars. So we put $30 billion in for electronic record keeping. Well, guess what? It got divided up 5 ways, and they came up with 6 different silos in which you can't share the information by design. By design. We can solve all these problems. They're technological problems. That's not a cancer problem. But we need your help. We need your help. I was asked why I was going down to South by Southwest to talk about cancer. Because you're some of the most innovative minds in the world sitting in front of me. If I can take my cell phone and find out exactly what movie is playing here or anywhere in the country tonight and what times there are, if I can track a check I wrote to know exactly when it was cashed, and I can go on and on, why can't I do some of the things that need to be done in this fight? Your generation can be the first generation on Earth that grows through life with a completely different understanding of cancer as preventable or controllable disease rather than a death sentence. I see the day when patients get the right therapy the first time. So then our power to do that now. I see the day where prevention is more effective and where care is personalized and more effective with less harmful side effects. I see the day when those of you in this room, when you take your children and grandchildren to their school physical in September, they will be vaccinated along with their measles vaccination. They'll literally be vaccinated against certain cancers, prevent them from getting certain. It already occurs. You can be vaccinated against HPV now. I see the day when we'll be able to identify through markers in the blood cancers that haven't even developed yet, or to catch cancer when it's most treatable by identifying early signals of cancer in blood from biological fragments shed from that cancer cell. And the one thing I can tell you, there is hope, but the one thing I can also tell you, if any of you have dealt with cancer, you need hope. If we did nothing more, not one new breakthrough, we did nothing more than break down the silos that are preventing greater collaboration because of the way the system has been arranged, not intentionally, but come up over the last 50 years. We could at minimum extend the life of a lot of people with cancer. How many clinicians are in the room? Raise your hand. Any clinicians in the room? Well, there are a couple. They can tell you, Doc, how many times have you had a patient say to you, Doc, I know you can't save me, but Doc, can you give me one more month? I want to walk her up the aisle. Just give me one more month. Doc, if I only have 2 more weeks, I can see the baby born. Can you just give me a couple more weeks, Doc? I'm not asking you to cure me. Can you give me a couple more weeks? If I had just 6 more months, I could put my finances in order. So when I go, they're not going to lose the house. That's the urgency of now. This moment, this instant, now. I've taken too much of your time, but when President Kennedy described sending humankind to the moon. And most of you can probably recite pieces of that speech he made. He talked about one very important thing. He talked about the effort to go to the moon as something, a commitment that the American people have made and that they were, quote, unwilling to postpone. That was his phrase. He said, we as Americans, we are unwilling to postpone. I am unwilling to postpone for one day longer the things we can do now to extend people's lives, and so should you be. We can make enormous, enormous, enormous progress. Thank you all. Thank you for your time. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Set the house on fire with bombs in your eyes. Well, the matter never seemed to make you afraid. Hit the ground running Los Angeles. Find another naive on the twist tonight. And if you're thinking that you'd like to quit, that's fine. You never wanted it anyway. Something tells me that you're never gonna stop till you get what you want. And don't you tell me that you never really thought that maybe we could run. Maybe we could run. Maybe we could run. You can be a singer that everyone loves, or maybe a man that the people trust. Follow your dreams until you're on your knees. Then tell me what you're gonna be when you give up. You can be a fighter who's oh so tough, or maybe a model who struts their stuff. Follow your heart until you fall apart. Then tell me what you're gonna be when you give up. When you give up. Oh, what you gonna keep when you had enough? Oh, what you gonna be when you give up? When you give up. You can be a priest or an archbishop, or maybe a gambler who calls and bluffs. Give up your soul, blow on the dice.